Sydney's summer sky glowed with a golden haze as Margaret Collins stepped out of the taxi. She smoothed the creases in her dress, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nerves. This was her son Daniel's wedding, a day she had dreamed of since he was a child. The venue was dazzling. A seaside estate stood against the horizon, its white walls gleaming under the sun. Guests in elegant clothes streamed towards the entrance, their laughter echoing across the courtyard. Margaret hesitated for a moment, clutching her small handbag, then took a steady breath and walked inside. The hall was decorated with roses and lilies, tables draped in ivory linen. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne. Margaret's eyes searched for Daniel. She finally spotted him near the altar, looking every bit the groom in his tailored suit. His smile lit up the room, but it was not for her. It was for Emily, his bride, radiant in silk and lace. Margaret's chest tightened with emotion. She wanted to run to her son, to tell him how proud she was. Yet she noticed something strange. Daniel barely glanced at her. Instead, he kept close to Emily's family, laughing warmly with them, his arm around his new father-in-law. When Margaret tried to approach, a bridesmaid gently steered her towards a table at the far corner. "This is your seat, Mrs. Collins," she said politely but firmly. The words stung. Margaret had imagined sitting close to Daniel, but now she was placed among distant relatives she barely knew. As the ceremony began, the guests cheered and clapped. Margaret clapped too, her smile fixed, though her heart felt heavy. She whispered softly, "You are still my boy, Daniel," but her voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. The feast was about to begin. Margaret sat waiting, unaware that this night would leave her humiliated and broken, yet determined in a way she had never been before. The sun had dipped beneath the horizon, and lanterns now bathed the estate in a golden glow. Music filled the air, violins weaving through the laughter of the guests. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted lamb, seafood platters, and desserts so delicate they looked like art. Margaret's stomach growled softly. She had not eaten since morning, saving her appetite for this special day. As the waiters glided through the hall, setting plates in front of guests, she straightened her back and waited. One by one, steaming plates were placed before the guests at her table. Her eyes followed every tray, her heart lifting each time a waiter approached. But each time, the waiter turned away at the last moment. She glanced across the room. Daniel and Emily were laughing with their friends, their table overflowing with food. Plates of sizzling steak, golden potatoes, and fresh vegetables were passed around. Glasses were raised. Toasts were made. Still, Margaret's plate remained empty. A cold trickle of shame spread through her chest. She leaned closer to a passing waiter. "Excuse me, I have not been served." The waiter paused, frowning, before murmuring, "I will check," and hurried away. He never returned. Minutes stretched into an hour. Guests wiped their mouths with napkins, plates cleared and replaced with desserts. Margaret's table companions avoided her eyes, uncomfortable with her obvious exclusion. Finally, a young waitress placed a plate before her. Margaret's heart leapt, but then sank. It was scraps. The cold vegetables, a piece of meat already dry and tough, clearly leftovers from the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she picked up her fork. Every bite tasted of humiliation. Around her, guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the music swelled. No one noticed her pain, not even Daniel. Margaret forced herself to swallow the bitterness, but inside, something shifted. A flame sparked quietly in her heart. She would not forget this night. The laughter around the tables grew louder as the wine continued to flow. Guests leaned closer, sharing jokes, raising glasses high in celebration. Margaret sat still, her fork resting untouched on the side of her plate. The cold scraps in front of her had long since lost their taste, but the sting of being ignored clung to her like a shadow. She lifted her gaze, searching for her son. Daniel was on the dance floor now, twirling Emily under the warm lights. His face glowed with happiness, his laughter echoing across the hall. Every time he glanced towards the crowd, Margaret thought, hoped, that his eyes would meet hers. but each glance swept past her as if she did not exist. When the newlyweds approached the family tables, Emily stopped to hug her parents, her siblings, and even distant relatives who had traveled from far away. Daniel followed her lead, offering embraces and kisses. Margaret rose slightly from her seat, her heart pounding, ready to step forward. But then Emily's father called Daniel over with a booming voice. "Come, son. A toast with the family." Daniel turned without hesitation. Margaret froze, her half-step forward left hanging in the air. He raised his glass with Emily's family, their cheers drowning the soft whisper that left her lips. "I am your family, too." The hall erupted in applause as the toast ended, yet Margaret felt invisible. Guests at her table were already drifting away to join the crowd near the dance floor. She remained behind, sitting alone, her dignity crumbling piece by piece. Her chest ached, but her eyes stayed dry. She refused to cry, not here, not where anyone could see. Instead, she pressed her trembling hands together under the table. That flame inside her, the one lit when she was served cold scraps, grew brighter. It whispered to her with a steady voice, "They may push you aside, but you will not stay in the shadows forever." The music swelled as couples filled the dance floor. Margaret watched as Daniel and Emily moved gracefully, followed by their friends and family. The hall shone with joy, yet none of it reached her. She pushed herself up, deciding she would join them, if only for one dance. Her feet carried her slowly across the polished floor, her eyes fixed on Daniel. But just as she reached the edge of the crowd, a bridesmaid stepped in front of her. "Oh, Mrs. Collins, perhaps you would be more comfortable watching from your table," she said with a strained smile. The words were polite, but the meaning was sharp. Margaret faltered. She stood in the glow of the chandeliers, yet she felt swallowed by darkness. Around her, laughter rang, shoes tapped, glasses clinked, but she was invisible. She returned to her corner, her head held high even as her heart cracked silently. The night grew late, but the celebration only deepened. Margaret, restless, stepped outside into the cool night air. The garden was lit with fairy lights, the ocean beyond shimmering under the moon. As she wandered along the path, voices drifted from the veranda. She recognized Emily's voice, sharp and dismissive. "She does not fit in, Daniel. She is too simple, too plain. My family expects better." Margaret froze. Her breath caught in her throat as Daniel's reply followed, hesitant. "She is my mother. But you are right. Tonight is about us, not her." The words pierced deeper than any blade. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest, the flame of quiet resolve turning into something stronger. If they thought her weak, they were wrong. She would remember every slight, every humiliation. When the final song was played, Margaret lingered near the exit. She had hoped Daniel would come to her, offer at least a word of gratitude, a farewell hug. But Daniel and Emily swept past with their friends, laughter trailing in their wake. Emily's parents hugged them tightly, showering them with blessings. No one noticed Margaret standing by the door, her handbag clutched against her chest. She slipped into the night unnoticed, her shoes tapping softly against the cobblestones. The taxi ride back to her small flat was silent, the city lights blurring through her tears. That night, she sat alone at her kitchen table. The bouquet she had brought for Emily rested limp on the counter, forgotten. Margaret whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the ache in her throat. "They will learn what it means to cast me aside." Days turned into weeks. Margaret carried herself with composure, greeting neighbors with the same gentle smile, tending her small garden as always. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside she was building something new. Her silence was not defeat, it was strength gathering. She replayed every moment from the wedding, each humiliation carved into her memory like stone. She began keeping notes in a small leather-bound book, writing down the words she had overheard, the way they had looked through her as if she were nothing. Each page was a promise, to herself, not to them. Her resolve deepened, shaping into a quiet force. She would not confront them with anger. No, her strength would reveal itself in time, and when it did, They would not forget. One morning, a knock echoed at Margaret's door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, his suit rumpled, his expression uneasy. "Mother," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Emily and we wanted to visit." Margaret's heart tightened. She invited them in, her voice calm, though every nerve trembled. Emily stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the modest flat, her lips curling slightly, as if in silent judgment. They spoke of trivial things: the weather, Daniel's work, Emily's family. Not once did Daniel mention the wedding. Not once did Emily thank her. Margaret served them tea, her hands steady. She listened, she nodded, but deep inside she knew. This visit was not for her sake, it was for appearances. When they left, the silence that followed felt heavier than ever. Margaret returned to her leather book, adding another line. Even their kindness is hollow. The months that followed were filled with silence from Daniel. No calls, no letters, no visits. Margaret watched from a distance as his life with Emily bloomed on the lips of neighbors and newspapers. Parties, business ventures, photographs in glossy magazines. Margaret was erased. One evening, she attended a community gathering by the harbor. To her shock, she saw Daniel and Emily there, surrounded by admirers. She stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible once more. Then Emily's voice rose above the chatter. "We owe everything to my family. Without them, we would be nothing." Daniel smiled and nodded. He did not correct her. Margaret's hands clenched at her sides. This was her breaking point. She had carried his childhood alone, his schooling, his dreams. And now he denied her existence. The flame inside her roared to life. She no longer whispered her promise to herself. She said it aloud, clear and unshaken. "You will remember me." That night, Margaret returned home and opened her leather-bound book. Page after page of pain and betrayal stared back at her. She pressed her hand firmly over the words, as if sealing them into her very skin. She stood before the mirror, her reflection marked by quiet determination. She was no longer the invisible mother at the corner table, no longer the woman left with cold scraps. Margaret Collins had been humiliated, ignored, and erased. But she was not broken. She was waiting. Her vow was silent, but it was strong enough to shake the very foundations of her soul. One day, Daniel and Emily would face the weight of what they had done. One day, they would understand that pushing her aside had awoken a strength they could never silence. And when that day came, Margaret would not seek revenge with anger. She would rise with dignity, her silence more powerful than their cruelty. The night outside was quiet, the waves against Sydney's shore steady and endless. Margaret closed her book, placed it gently on the table, and whispered into the stillness. "They will remember me,